Silvano had flagged 400 efficiency reports that cycle, and Halden Relay was the only one that made her stop scrolling. Not because the numbers were bad. Because they didn't make sense. The station's delivery log showed 11 shipments arriving on schedule last month. The Unity Lattice's own routing record showed only 7 ever being assigned a path. 4 cargo runs had reached their destinations without the network that was supposed to be the only way anything moved between stars. She read the line twice. Then she opened a formal audit request, because that was what an anomaly like this was supposed to get, and because Silvano did not like reports that didn't add up sitting in her queue overnight. She'd once asked a compact engineer, at a conference 11 years earlier, why nobody had ever built a second optimizer as a backup to the Lattice. He'd laughed, not unkindly. You want to spend a decade's shipping budget insuring against a system that's never failed once? Try explaining that math to a budget committee and see how far you get. She'd found that convincing at the time. The compact had built the Lattice 30 years ago, one system routing every ship, every cargo hold, every docking slot across 100 worlds, and it had never once needed a second system standing behind it. Every member species had migrated fully onto it. Except, according to this file, Halden Relay's small human logistics division, which still ran something they called the manual roster, a handful of crude cargo ships flying routes by voice coordination and paper manifests, duplicating work the Lattice already did for free. It was inefficient. Frankly, it was a little embarrassing. It was the kind of thing new compact members grew out of, once they understood how the system worked. Humans had been full members for 6 years. Silvano had assumed the habit would have faded by now. She arrived at Halden Relay on a transport that smelled faintly of machine oil, and something warm she couldn't place. From the viewport, the station looked exactly like its file photo. A squat cylinder ringed with docking arms, patched in places with hull plating a shade darker than the rest. It was the kind of visible repair history that better-funded stations usually kept off their public specifications. It was small, function over polish, built to move cargo rather than impress visitors. Dara Voss met her at the dock, mid-40s, sleeves pushed up, a stylus tucked behind one ear like she'd forgotten it was there. "You're the audit," Dara said. Not a question. "I'm the audit," Silvano agreed. "Your division logged 4 deliveries the Lattice never routed. I'd like to understand how that happened." Dara didn't look surprised, and didn't look worried either, which Silvano noted the way she noted most things, carefully, without comment. "Come on. Easier to show you than explain it." They walked to a cramped operations room where 3 humans sat at old-fashioned consoles, headsets on, talking to ships instead of routing them through the network. One of them, a young man with a clipped, tired voice, was mid-conversation. "Coldwater, you're clear to swap the medical crates to Bay 4, hand carry, don't wait on a Lattice slot, we don't have one." A pause. "Copy. 15 minutes, not 20. I'll hold the door." Dara nodded at the display without breaking stride. "Kian's bringing the Coldwater in early. He does this a lot. Lattice gave that shipment a routing window 6 hours from now. Patient needed the crates today, not in 6 hours. So we moved it ourselves." Silvano watched the exchange happen, no automated approval, no optimizer confirmation, just 2 humans deciding something and doing it. It shouldn't have been remarkable. It was efficient in a way that had nothing to do with the metrics she measured. "You bypass the network's timing whenever it's inconvenient," she said. "We bypass it when someone's life doesn't fit the Lattice's schedule," Dara said. "Which is more often than you'd think." She said it plainly, without defensiveness, the way someone states a fact they've stopped expecting anyone to argue with. "The manual roster isn't hiding from the Lattice, auditor. It's not a workaround. It's just always there. Underneath it. Why keep an entire parallel fleet running for occasions this rare?" Dara was quiet for a second, like she was deciding how much of the real answer was worth giving a stranger on her first day. "Because networks fail," she said finally. "Ours have. More than once, a long time ago, back home. You centralized everything. It's beautiful right up until the day it isn't. Then everything goes dark at the same time, because it was all one thing pretending to be many things. She shrugged, like this was obvious. We didn't want to bet the whole colony on right up until. Silvano filed the answer without fully believing it mattered. It read to her, like a habit dressed up as philosophy, a story a species told itself to feel less behind. She wrote cultural inefficiency, low operational impact in her draft notes. Before she left the ops room that first day, she walked its length once, the way she always did on a new audit, not looking for anything specific, just building a sense of the place. The consoles were old but well kept, edges worn smooth where hands had rested on them for years. A paper manifest hung clipped to the wall beside one station, corrections written in by hand, a kind of redundancy that made no obvious sense next to a network that tracked everything automatically anyway. Above the main console hung a printed schedule, 12 months long, one date circled in every column. She didn't need to ask what it was. She asked anyway. That's the drill, Dara said, following her gaze. Third Tuesday every month, whether anyone thinks we need it or not. 6 years unbroken. 6 years unbroken. Dara said it like a fact she was proud of and slightly embarrassed to be proud of, both at once. You'll probably want to sit in on the next one. See what an inefficiency looks like from the inside. Silvano hadn't planned to stay that long. Staying would mean rearranging her transport booking and filing an amendment to her assignment schedule, the kind of small paperwork change that tended to draw exactly the sort of attention from her own supervisors she generally preferred to avoid. She filed it anyway. She did not yet know that in 2 days, the lattice would stop answering anyone at all. The manual roster, Silvano learned over the next 2 days, was not a hobby. It had a full-duty rotation. 6 ships, 12 crew, a maintenance schedule as rigorous as anything the lattice ran, and this was the part that actually made her stop and reread her notes. A training exercise held every single month, without exception, for 6 years. Dara called it the drill. Silvano had assumed it meant a fire drill, or an evacuation rehearsal. It was neither. We simulate the lattice going down, Dara explained, when Silvano finally asked. All of it. Every route, every optimizer, no warning. We run the whole station on manual coordination for 6 hours and see what breaks. Silvano asked what, exactly, had broken, over 6 years of drills. Dara pulled up a log without hesitating, like she'd been asked before, and enjoyed the answer. 8 months ago we lost the backup comm relay halfway through, actual equipment failure, not part of the exercise. Kian's crew was routing blind for 40 minutes on a dead channel and ended up improvising a relay through a mining tug that happened to be in range. She scrolled further back. 11 months before that, we ran 2 ships into the same berth because a manifest got copied wrong by hand. Cost us 4 hours and a genuinely awkward safety review. You keep records of your own failures. Especially our own failures, Dara said. The whole point is finding out what breaks while it doesn't matter yet. If nothing ever breaks in a drill, we're not drilling hard enough. The lattice has never gone down. Not once station-wide in 30 years. I know, Dara said. We still run it. Silvano found this less impressive than baffling. 6 years of monthly drills, real crew hours spent, real fuel burned, preparing for a failure the compact's own engineers considered statistically negligible. It was the kind of expense that, on any other station, would have been cut in the first budget review. She asked Dara why it had survived 6 years of budget reviews. Because I kept authorizing it, Dara said. And nobody with the authority to stop me ever asked why closely enough to actually stop me. She smiled faintly at that. Bureaucracy cuts both ways, auditor. Silvano asked, because she'd learned by then that Dara answered direct questions more readily than leading ones, why she'd fought for this specifically, over any of a dozen other contingency measures a station this size might have prioritized instead. Because it doesn't need permission to work, Dara said. Everything else on my equipment list needs power, or a working comm array, or someone higher up signing off in a hurry. This just needs people who already know what to do, and a schedule nobody talked me out of. Silvano wrote that down too, though she wasn't yet sure which section of the audit it belonged in. By the time she left the station office that evening, Silvano's findings were mostly drafted, the anomaly explained, the drill documented, the numbers accounted for. The recommendation line she still hadn't committed to paper. She'd written maintain manual roster at and stopped there 3 times, unsure what came after. At. She rode along on the Coldwater for a routine run that same evening, partly for the audit file, partly, she admitted to herself, out of something closer to curiosity than obligation. Kian Ottera flew the ship the way he talked, economical, no wasted motion. You don't trust the lattice, Silvano said, watching him plot a course by hand that the network could have generated in half a second. Trust it fine, Kian said, not looking up from the manifest. Just don't like betting a patient's morning on a single point of failure. Old habit. He tapped the screen. Also means nobody yells at me over a network I don't control, when it's wrong instead of me. That's not systemic caution. That's a maintenance complaint. Same thing half the time. He said it without looking for a laugh, already moving to the next line item, and Silvano found she almost gave him one anyway. The Coldwater's cargo hold was half full of medical crates and half full of ordinary station resupply, stacked and lashed by hand rather than sorted by any automated system. Silvano asked why the two were loaded together instead of scheduled separately, the way the lattice would have done it. Because I'm already flying this direction, Kian said, like the question answered itself. Splitting it into 2 trips because a database says so is how you end up with 2 half-empty ships instead of 1 full one. I don't need the lattice to tell me that. I've got eyes. She was still writing that down, in the part of her notes that wasn't for the official file, when the alert came through. Not from Halden Relay. From the lattice itself. A cascading fault, origin unclear, propagating outward through the network's shared routing core faster than any single station could contain it. Within 90 seconds, 400 systems lost contact with the optimizer simultaneously. Every ship in transit anywhere in compact space stopped receiving instructions at exactly the same moment. Silvano sat very still in the Coldwater's cramped cockpit, watching every display that had shown live routing data go quiet within the same 6-second window, and understood, with a kind of cold clarity, that the thing Kian had said an hour earlier had just stopped being a hypothetical. Kian didn't wait for instructions before turning the Coldwater back toward Halden Relay. Silvano didn't ask him to. The short flight back passed almost entirely in silence, both of them watching the same handful of dead displays, waiting for any of them to flicker back on. None did. Silvano's first instinct, trained into her by 30 years of compact service, was to wait for the recovery protocol. There was one on paper. The optimizer was supposed to diagnose itself and restart. Silvano remembered, distantly, an engineering review a decade back that had flagged this as the lattice's one real vulnerability, a single point of failure nobody had funded a fix for, because the odds, on paper, were vanishingly small. The odds had just stopped mattering. For the first several minutes, Silvano did what she'd been trained to do in any emergency involving compact infrastructure. She opened a formal incident channel and waited for instructions from a coordinating authority. No instructions came. The coordinating authority ran on the same optimizer that had just gone silent. She sat with that for exactly as long as it took to understand that, for the first time in her career, there was no higher process left to defer to. By the time the Coldwater docked, Halden Relay's operations room was already filling with the kind of controlled urgency Silvano had only read about in disaster case studies. Daravaz stood at the center of it, headset already on, voice level in a way that seemed to steady the room around her. Full manual roster, all 6 ships now, she said. Kian, you're closest to the Meridian, hospital ship, life support on a 40-hour reserve. She was 3 hours out from a scheduled lattice resupply that isn't coming. Get her coordinates. Copy, Kian said, already moving. Silvano watched Dara run the room without a single automated system behind her, voice to voice, ship to ship, decisions made and confirmed out loud in real time, the exact process she had, 2 days earlier, called an inefficiency worth reducing. It should have looked chaotic. It looked like something that had been rehearsed until it wasn't chaos anymore. "You built this for exactly this," Silvano said quietly, half to herself. "We built it for something like this," Dara said, not looking up from the display. "We didn't know it'd be this." Silvano watched the room work through its first real test within the hour. One of Halden's own ships, the Pharaoh, went quiet mid-relay, 3 minutes with no response, long enough for the room to go very still around her. "Pharaoh, respond," Dara said, and said it again, level, nothing in her voice that Silvano could hear, though her knuckles had gone pale on the edge of the console. The answer came back half static, then clear. "Sorry, had to cut power to reroute past the debris field. The lattice would have flagged for us automatically. We're fine. Cargo's fine. Give me 60 seconds to get back on a clean channel." The room exhaled, quietly, and went back to work. Silvano noted, in the part of her file that wasn't for the record, that nobody had panicked. They had simply waited badly and kept going. 20 minutes later, 2 calls came in within seconds of each other. A supply convoy near the outer marker reported a hull breach, survivable, worsening. A research outpost on the far side of the system reported its backup power failing, no immediate danger, hours before it would matter. Dara made the call without pausing to consult anyone. "Coldwater convoy first. We can reach the outpost in time either way. We can't reach the breach in time if we wait." "Copy," Kian said, and didn't ask her to justify it. Silvano watched the decision get made and executed in under 10 seconds. There was a kind of certainty in it that only came from having thought about this exact choice long before it mattered. Nobody in the room second-guessed it. There wasn't time to, and none of them seemed to feel the need to anyway. The first hours felt almost manageable. Halden's small fleet absorbed the overflow from 3 nearby stations, running deliveries by hand the way they trained to 100 times before. Silvano let herself think briefly that this was contained, a bad day, not a catastrophe. Then the numbers came in from farther out, and the shape of it changed. The stall wasn't resolving. It was spreading, station after station reporting the same total blackout, no local cause, no local fix, because there had never needed to be one. Species who had fully migrated onto the lattice decades ago had nothing left underneath it. No manual roster. No drill. No second system quietly waiting in reserve. When the one thing failed, there was simply nothing behind it. The Meridian was not the only ship stranded. She was one of 43. "We can't reach all of them," Kian said, back on calm, voice tight for the first time. "Not with 6 ships. Not in the time some of these life support windows have left." The room went quiet in a different way than it had at the start, not the silence of a system failing, but the particular silence of people doing arithmetic they didn't want to finish out loud. Silvano felt something she hadn't expected to feel watching this unfold, the pull to help, not observe. "What do you need?" she said, and it wasn't a question. Dara looked at her for exactly 1 second, weighing it, then didn't waste time being surprised. "Every crewed vessel in range, compact registry or not. You have contacts on stations that haven't gone dark yet. Get them talking to us directly, ship to ship, voice, no network required, because there isn't one anymore. We route by hand. All of it. Tonight." Silvano spent the next several minutes talking faster than she was used to talking, patching every compact channel she had authority to open directly into Halden's relay frequency, station by station, favor by favor, official procedure abandoned in favor of whatever worked. Nobody asked her for authorization paperwork. She didn't offer any. It was exactly what Kian had described, hours earlier, on the Coldwater. Not a backup system waiting to be switched on. An instinct practiced until it became reflex. Now it was being asked to carry an entire region's traffic at once. Whether it would be enough, Nobody in that room could promise. But for the first time since the lattice went dark, there was a plan, spoken aloud, moving. It took 19 hours to reach every stranded ship. Not because the manual roster was fast. Because it refused to stop. Salvano spent most of it relaying coordinates between stations whose own logistics staff had never coordinated a single delivery without the lattice telling them how, watching human dispatchers from 3 different stations fall into the same rhythm Dara ran without needing to be taught it. Short, direct, voice-to-voice, decisions owned the moment they were made instead of waiting for a system to confirm them. The meridian was reached with 6 hours of life support left. Kian's crew wasn't the one that got there. A Station 2 Systems oversent one of its own aging cargo haulers, coordinated entirely through Halden's relay, flown by a captain who had never run a manual delivery outside of a drill in her life and did it anyway, talking to Dara the entire way in. Salvano heard the contact happen over the open relay, the whole operations room listening without anyone asking them to be quiet for it. A woman's voice came through, hoarse, careful not to sound as relieved as she clearly was. "This is Meridian Actual. We have you on approach. We did not think anyone was coming." "Everyone's coming," the responding captain said. "Just took some of us longer to hear about it than others." Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Then Dara was already back on comm to the next ship on the list, and the moment moved on the way all of them had to, that night. By the time the lattice's optimizer finally restarted, 22 hours after the stall began, every stranded ship in the region had been reached. Not by the network. By people, talking to each other, doing the unglamorous thing they'd trained for and never expected to need. 3 had needed real rescue, hull breaches, injuries, 1 engine fire brought under control with an extinguisher system older than most of the crew fighting it. The rest had simply needed someone to tell them where to go, which turned out to matter almost as much. Salvano stood in the operations room afterward, in the particular quiet that follows an emergency once it's actually over. Not relief exactly. More the flatness of a room that had been running at full intensity for a full day and suddenly had nothing left to do. "You didn't build the manual roster for this," she said to Dara. "You built it for a much smaller version of this. A single station outage. Not the whole network." "No," Dara agreed. "We didn't." She looked exhausted in a way that seemed to go deeper than the last 22 hours. "We just built it to still work if it turned out we were wrong about how safe the big system was." She glanced at Salvano. "Guess we were." Around them, the operations room was slowly losing its emergency brightness, someone dimming the overhead lights back to their ordinary working level, someone else already restacking the paper manifests that had piled up through the night. A junior dispatcher walked past with 2 cups of something dark and bitter, handed one to Dara without being asked, and didn't offer Salvano one, which she found she minded less than she expected to. The compact's formal record of the stall would be filed weeks later. It would describe a regional infrastructure failure, contained through emergency coordination and mutual aid among affected stations. It would not name Halden Relay specifically. That wasn't a deliberate omission. The investigation covered 400 systems at once, and one station's 19-hour relay effort was a single data point lost inside a report the size of the disaster itself. Somewhere in the last hour of the relay effort, without quite noticing she was doing it, Salvano had finished the sentence she'd left hanging 2 days earlier. Maintain manual roster at reduced scale. Old habit, writing the expected conclusion before she'd decided whether she still believed it. Salvano opened the recommendation one more time. She looked at the word reduced for a long moment, thought about 4 shipments that had never made sense to her 2 days ago and made complete sense now, and deleted it. She left the line unfinished again, this time on purpose. Dara found her still at the console an hour later, packing the last of her equipment for the transport home. The corridor outside had settled back into its ordinary rhythm, dock crews calling cargo weights to each other over the low hum of a station that had, for one very long night, run entirely on people instead of machines. "Well?" Dara asked. "I don't have a recommendation yet," Salvano said. I have a question. How long would it take to teach the drill to a station that's never run one? Dara didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, longer than one bad day. That's kind of the point. Silvano nodded, and didn't write anything down. On the transport out, she found the same viewport angle she'd arrived through, and watched Halden Relay shrink back down to a patched, unremarkable cylinder against the dark. It looked exactly like it had in the file photo.